That's where most of us get it wrong. We see success as it is portrayed in social media today, when we could be looking at the long tail of years and years and years of effort that we did not see. Because society right now is focused, our attentions are drawn toward the success that is already there, that is already ripe, and that is already apparent. And we think that the other people took shortcuts and got lucky getting to their success. And we aspire, instead of aspiring for the patience to work, for the values and the learnings that are necessary to slowly arrive at that success, we aspire to become overnight successes as well. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Yellow Pill Podcast. This is episode 3 of our podcast, and in this episode, I'm going to share with you a little secret. But before we get down to discussing the nitty-gritty details of the quickest way to succeed in life, let's explore some pain points first. Everybody wants to be successful in life, in one way or another. Be it athletic success, material success, wealth, status, happiness, you name it. Everybody wants to achieve something worthwhile in their lives. As humans, we have evolved to be with tribes, to be with other people. And as society started to form, we started to evolve to measure success relative to that of other people in society. So success isn't really a material, immutable goalpost that's out there. It's something that's relative to our own heads. Success is our own human concept of how we fare in relation to other people with respect to a certain thing or a certain measure. And we come up with all different sorts of measures. Success can be physical, as in the olden days when they'd have people winning golds in the first Olympics ever played. Success could be conquest. It could be kings expanding their civilizations, ruling over other nations and making them their own, usually through violence and bloodshed. Success could be economic success. People amassing wealth and buying influence and buying power. Success could also be measured by influence or by power. But what does it really take to be successful in the modern day? The problem with how success is defined in the modern setting is that there's a time element woven into success. As you noticed, people today seem to celebrate success that comes in rapid fashion, in a rapid manner, the overnight success or the rags to riches story. This is amplified by social media when we see all kinds of people, hitting that jackpot idea or hitting the lottery. Everybody wants to be successful, but nobody actually wants to do the actual work that's necessary in order to be successful. Everybody just wants to be lucky. And that's the thing. Not everybody can be lucky. But the good news for us is that we don't have to be lucky. There is a way to ensure your own success in life. And in fact, this is the quickest and surest way to succeed in life. Are you ready for it? This is the secret to success that nobody is telling you. Guys, we can succeed by optimizing for the long term. So what does that mean? It means understanding the concepts and building systems optimized towards tail-end success. Now, tail-end success is long-term success. This is actually a concept that I got from Morgan Housel in his book, The Psychology of Money. It's a really good book. It's a must-read. And this layers into the base yellow pill principles that we have, which is failing forward and being counterintuitive. Now, before we delve into optimizing for long-term gains, optimizing for your tail-end success, which is the secret sauce actually, and the main topic of this podcast episode, first let's discuss failing forward and the counterintuitive approach to everything. Failing forward itself is counterintuitive. It simply means that you can actually fail and fail and fail and still be successful in the end. And this part grows in its significance later on, so bear with me, guys. And by the way, if you're a follower of the Yellow Pill Podcast, but you haven't liked and subscribed yet, please click subscribe, and maybe you can show that like button some love as well. This would help this video reach other people and gather like minds such as yourself and myself together in this channel. My goal in making these videos is to educate everyone and to help pass some of my ideas along. These ideas are the same ideas that have helped me grow my business from scratch to where it is today, and I'm passing them along with the hopes that it can help you guys as well. You guys who are starting out or looking for base principles to build your successful business empires upon. So best of luck to all of you. Let's proceed. So failing forward simply just means that every time you fail, every failure carries with it a lesson. And learning and adjusting from all these failures and integrating all of these lessons can actually be your road to success. So we have it in a firm. We actually got this principle from Ray Dalio, wherein you grow and then you reach your first obstacle. The obstacle sets you back and then you fail. And then from your failure, you're able to extract the lesson, crystallize it into principle, and apply it to the problem to solve the problem and get to the next level, get to the next problem. And then you fail again. And then you take the lesson from your mistake, you crystallize it into principle until you grow, and then you grow, and then you grow. As you fail, your failures get bigger, but even if you don't see it, your accomplishments get bigger as well. So the next time you look at yourself in the mirror and think that, oh, I'm a loser, I'm a failure, everyone starts as a failure, guys. If you remember the poem, The Ladder of St. Augustine was a failure, a drunkard. He was nobody in life. But he realized that if he could make a ladder from his failures, step by step, he can climb out of his own rut and turn his life around. And in fact, that's what he did. And it's a beautiful poem. I have a couple of lines that I've taken from it, but this one is my favorite. He says, "The heights by great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upward in the night." And it goes on for a couple more verses before it says, "We have not wings, we cannot soar, but we have feet to scale and climb, by slow degree, by more and more, the cloudy summit of our time." So it talks about how success can be reached inch by inch, failure upon failure. All that we need is time and patience. And that's what I want to teach everyone today. That's what I want to share with everyone. Sometimes big things take time, and you need to have the patience to see yourself throughout the arc of a long-term strategy in order for you to succeed. As the military says, improvise, adapt, overcome. And that is failing forward. Which brings us to our next foundational principle before we move to the tail end gains, which is the counterintuitive way. The counterintuitive way essentially postulates that if everyone has had it figured out already, then why do we still have a lot of problems in the world? Why isn't everyone rich yet? Why is it that only a few people make it, whereas majority of the others fail, if everyone has figured it out already? This leads us to the suspicion that not everyone has figured it out, or we could be wrong about a lot of our base assumptions. That's why, in our company, we like to test assumptions always. We always try to look for the counterintuitive way to take our group to the next level, and this is something that you can take from us. One thing is, if you want to go fast, then you need to go slow. It doesn't make sense when you think about it intuitively, because intuitively, we are wired to think that if you want to go fast, then you need to go fast. But when you go fast, then you're tempted to take all of the shortcuts that you could take. Sometimes taking shortcuts could actually lead to ruin or lead to delay in the long run, because the shortcuts you take are actually the long cuts that you make. What do I mean? When you take shortcuts, then you just delay the learning. You just delay the necessary lesson. A lesson could have been learned in this or that turn by making the mistake. But when you take shortcuts, when you take cheats, you put yourself ahead of others, although you don't deserve it. That's going to come back to bite you in the ass one of these days. So the shortcuts you take are the long cuts you make. That's why we want to build our success as slowly as possible, because slow is smooth and smooth is fast. These are some of the counterintuitive beliefs that we share as a group in our law firm, in our real estate arm, and this has led us to considerable success. From a small partnership of 2 back in 2016, we're now a growing group of over 40 stakeholders, lawyers, brokers, real estate professionals combined, and we're just growing from there. So if there's one thing we can credit to all the success that we have accomplished and we have accumulated over the last couple of years, it's 1, being principles-based in our approach to work. It's 2, belief in the system, in our principles, in ourselves, and in each other that we can make this work. And 3, optimizing for our own tail-end gains. Playing the infinite sum game and playing the long-term game at the same time. This is our secret sauce, guys, and feel free to take it from us. Feel free to take it from us. The infinite sum game is actually a principle wherein all of us can be winners. And because all of us can be winners, then I have no qualms sharing all of this knowledge to you. So are you ready? So this is how you optimize for the long-term game, and ironically and counterintuitively, this is the quickest way to succeed in life. In any endeavor, guys, in any endeavor. But first, I'd like to start with a quote from Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt, accepting an award from the Screen Actors Guild, had this to say to the crowd. I've been banging away at this thing for 30 years. I think the simple math is, some projects work and some don't. There's no reason to belabor each one. Just get on to the next. Essentially, what this means is that you can be wrong for most of the time and still be right when it matters. And actually, the next couple of stories that I'm going to share with you are stories that are taken from Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. Chapter 6 of his book is really titled, Tails, You Win. And no one else elucidates and instructs and educates as clearly and as concisely as Morgan Housel. So we're going to borrow some of the stories from his book and share it with all of you today. So the first story that I'm going to share with you is the story of Heinz Berggruen. So Heinz Berggruen is a German who fled the Nazi occupation of Germany back in the 1930s. He fled to America and began collecting art. He was a massive art collector. And when he got old in the year 2000, he sold his massive art collection of Picasso's, Klees, and Matisse's to the German government. Now, he sold this to the German government for 100 million euros, which is a lot of money. But the thing is, all these art pieces taken together, they were actually worth more than $1 billion. So the Germans actually thought of it as sort of a donation that Berggruen would sell everything to them at just 100 million euros. After that, Berggruen was critically acclaimed. They couldn't figure out how one person, over the course of his lifetime, would be able to amass such a huge collection of important masterpieces of the time. And they even went on to describe that one person can collect huge quantities of masterpieces is outstanding. Art is as subjective as it gets. How could anyone have foreseen early in life what were to become the most sought-after works of the century? You could say it was skill, you could say it was luck. The investment firm Horizon Research has a third explanation, and it's very relevant to investors. The great art dealers operated like index funds. They bought everything that they could, and they bought in portfolios, not in individual pieces they happened to like. And then they sat and waited for a few winners to emerge. That's all that happens. Perhaps 99% of works someone like Berggruen acquired in his life turned out to be of little value, but that doesn't particularly matter if the other 1% turn out to be the work of someone like Picasso. Berggruen could still be wrong most of the time and still end up stupendously right. This first story is a clear example of optimizing for the tail end. Berggruen, over the course of his lifetime, mainly collected art, and he collected art the way an index fund would have done it. Just collect and collect and collect, and have a big leeway or capacity to be wrong most of the time. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many times you were wrong, but you could be right just one time, and it turns out to be a masterpiece, and that makes all the difference. Which leads us to another example of a tail-end gain. Because what is a tail-end gain in the first place? In his book, Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel talks about long-tail distributions, which is the furthest end of a distribution outcome. He talks about it in financial markets, virtually in every industry, where a small number of events can actually account for a majority of the outcomes. What is an example of a long-tail result? Let's look at Disney's Snow White. Steamboat Willie put Walt Disney on the map as an animator. Business was another story. Disney's first studio went bankrupt. His films were monstrously expensive to produce and financed at outrageous terms. But by the mid-1930s, Disney has produced more than 400 cartoons. Most of them were short, most of them beloved by viewers, and most of them lost a fortune. And then, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came and changed everything. What happened was, Disney was already in the business for a long time. But before 1938, it wasn't really successful by the magnitude that all of us know Disney today. Disney back then was a small-time cartoon studio. Steamboat Willie put Disney on the map. That's how all of us grew up to know Disney. It's probably the first cartoon that most of us saw as a kid, and it's probably the inspiration of a lot of modern cartoons today. But what we didn't know back then was the struggles of Walt Disney, starting out his own studio, being financed at outrageous terms. I imagine he had to borrow money because most of his projects wasn't earning that much yet. But what put Disney apart from the others is that while the others have succumbed because they couldn't take going from project to project to project, only seeing mediocre results. They couldn't take not seeing the results of their efforts. Walt Disney kept going until one day in 1938, he hit jackpot, his first and arguably the biggest jackpot of his life, when he released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the original one and not the remake that Disney is making today, touched the hearts of people. It was a charming story about virtue, about love, about friendship, camaraderie, and about the value of true beauty in a woman. And I think that resonated with most of the families of the time. It resonated with a virtue that everybody wanted to see and to espouse. And that's why Snow White became a massive hit. And talk about massive in scale. The $8 million that it earned in the first 6 months of 1938 was an order of magnitude higher than anything the company had earned previously. It completely transformed Disney Studios. All the company's debts were paid off. Key employees got retention bonuses. The company purchased a new state-of-the-art studio in Burbank, where it remains today. An Oscar turned Walt from famous to a full-blown celebrity. By 1938, Walt Disney had produced hours upon hours upon hours of film. But in business terms, the 83 minutes of Snow White were really all that mattered. Long tail distribution, guys. So if you really think about it, anything that is huge, profitable, famous, or influential is always the result of a tail event. An outlying, one in a thousands or one in a millions event, and that most of our attention goes to things that are huge, profitable, famous, or influential, when most of what we pay attention to is just the result of a tail. It's easy to underestimate how rare and powerful they are. That's where most of us get it wrong. We see success as it is portrayed in social media today, when we could be looking at the long tail of years and years and years of effort that we did not see. Because society right now is focused, our attentions are drawn toward the success that is already there, that is already ripe, and that is already apparent. And we think that the other people took shortcuts and got lucky getting to their success. And we aspire, instead of aspiring for the patience to work, for the values and the learnings that are necessary to slowly arrive at that success, we aspire to become overnight successes as well. And that's where most of us encounter problems. That's where most of us get stuck or give up or fail. Because if you're not optimizing for the long term, then you can get discouraged. Then you can get beat. Or you could be drawn to the next better looking opportunity, totally abandoning this one, the first one that you've had, where all along it could have been a good opportunity. Any opportunity could have been a good opportunity for you had you only had the patience and dedicated the time, the commitment, the effort to see it through and through. So one of the most common examples that a lot of us relate to today in terms of tail end gains or tail end distributions or tail end success, as we now start to understand the concept of it, is venture capital. And later on, I'm going to share with you how the strategy that we adopt in venture capital can actually also be used in investing in the stock market. Because right now, all of us have a misconception that we need to invest in good performing stocks. But if we go back to the base of it, guys, we need to be a bit more counterintuitive. So the counterintuitive way is to invest in everything anyway. I know you're thinking it doesn't make sense, but right now I'm going to explain to you why it actually does. So first, let's start with venture capital. As mentioned in the book, this is one of the obvious tail-end industries that we can make examples out of. If a venture capital makes 50 investments, they likely expect half of them to fail, 10 of them to do pretty well, and 1 or 2 to be bonanzas that drive 100% of the fund's returns. So if you think of it, venture capitalists, they're these people who pool loads and loads of money and invest them into startups. The failure rate of startups, it's bloody. It's bloody. Statistically, only 20% of startups do pretty well, and only one in 1,000 succeed to become the next Facebook, the next Google, the next Uber, the next Grab, the next Amazon. But venture capitalists, the way they're wired, they're willing to make those bets. They're willing to lose an awful lot of money, a shit ton of money, and they're willing to be wrong so many times just to be right when it matters. Just to be able to invest in the next Facebook, the next Google, the next Amazon. And that's how it is. Because venture capital as an industry is a very tail-end driven industry. You have 1 or 2 or 3 in 1,000 apps that actually change the game, actually disrupt technology and change the way humans interact with each other, interact with themselves, and interact with businesses. So, in short, these technologies, these tail-end technologies, end up changing the whole game for everyone. Here's a clearer look at venture capital stats. Out of more than 21,000 venture financings from 2004 to 2014, 65% of all the startups, they lost money. Only 2.5% of investments made a 10 to 20x return. Only 1% made for more than a 20x return. And only 0.5, or about only 100 companies out of 21,000 companies earned 50x or more. But that's where the majority of the industry's returns come from. Imagine from 2004 to 2014, in between those years, there were 21,000 startups. And venture capitalists took bets on all of these 21,000 companies. They could afford to be wrong 20,900 times just to be right the 100 times, where the industries actually changed the game. Tail end distribution. So this, you might think, is what makes venture capital so risky. And everyone investing in venture capital knows that it's risky. Most startups fail, and the world is only kind enough to allow a few mega successes. So if you want safer, predictable, and more stable returns, then you'd think you need to invest in large companies. But you need to remember, tails drive everything. We're going to move from venture capital now to private equity, to the stock market. And we're going to give two examples to contrast the expectation versus reality of it, to show that a counterintuitive approach can sometimes be the better approach in this modern day and age. So have you heard of the Carol Co. Corp? No? And have you heard of the Russell 3000 Index? No? Take note of the corporation and the index, guys, because we're going to weave them into a story that has a very valuable lesson at the end of it. So are you ready? So you said that you haven't heard of Carol Co. yet. So Carol Co. is actually one of the companies who used to be a member of the Russell 3000 Index. So Carol Co. is actually a movie studio responsible for giving us some of the biggest blockbusters in the 80s and 90s. Talk about the first 3 Rambo films, Terminator, Basic Instinct, and Total Recall. These are actually movies produced by Carol Co. By measure of blockbuster hits produced, Carol Co. is actually a very successful studio, very successful company during its time. Carol Co. was so successful, in fact, that it went public in 1987. And by 1991, it hit $500 million in revenue. So even in the early 90s, Carol Co. was on its way. It was a rising studio making big money, up until it failed. So in the mid-1990s, they had a few big budget films that flopped, and then flopped, and then flopped. And Carol Co. wasn't able to recover financially from this. And by the mid-1990s, it went bankrupt. And remember the Russell 3000 Index? This is the part of the story where it comes in. The Russell 3000 Index is actually a big and broad collection of companies since the 1980s. Now, JP Morgan once published a list of distribution of returns under the Russell 3000 Index. Over the years, 40% of the Russell 3000 Index companies would actually suffer losses and never recover over this period. In fact, the index's overall returns came from only 7% of the component companies who outperformed everyone else by at least 2 standard deviations. What does that mean? It means that the Russell 3000 Index is actually a broad index of, let's say, the top 3,000 companies of its time. Now, these are not run-of-the-mill companies, guys. These are actually publicly listed companies. It's so difficult to get your company publicly listed. You need to be very professional. You need to have all of your books in order. There's a long list of stringent requirements in order for your company to go IPO. So, Carol Co. was one of these companies. From a very popular studio company which produced some of our most beloved blockbuster hits, it became a statistic. It became one of the 40% of the companies who would go broke and never be able to recover in the Russell 3000 Index. Now, why don't we hear so much about such interesting stories such as Carol Co.? It's not because these stories are not worth telling, but it's because they're not unique. Statistically speaking, 4 in 10 companies suffer a catastrophic loss over time, a loss in which most of them never bounce back from. But here's the interesting thing. If 40% of the Russell 3000 Index companies, Carol Co. and the many, many thousands of others ended up as catastrophic failures, then why is the Russell 3000 Index itself a huge success? A huge success. This is the most important part of the story. The Russell 3000 index has increased more than 73-fold since the 1980s. Now that is a story of success, encapsulated in a world of failures. And to be successful in the long term, guys, you don't even have to be right all the time. You can fail your way towards success, such as what Amazon did with its company. In 2018, Amazon alone drove 6% of the S&P 500's returns, and Amazon's growth is almost entirely due to Prime and Amazon Web Services, which itself are tail events in a company that has experimented with hundreds of products, from the Fire Phone to travel agencies. Have you guys ever heard of Fire Phone? No? Well, it's good, because I'm going to come back to that point later on. The idea that a few things account for most results is not just true for companies in your investment portfolio. It's also an important part of your own behavior as an investor. Napoleon's definition of a military genius was the man who can do the average thing when all those around him are going crazy. It's the same in investing, and most financial advice is about today. That's the problem, guys. If you look at stock markets today, if you look at all of these market influencers, these stock market influencers, they tell you how the market's going on the day-to-day, on the week-to-week, and on month-to-month. And what's worse is that they tell you when to buy and when to sell. And you really have to doubt the integrity of these people, because these are people who are personally invested in the stock market. So the more influence they can peddle on gathering people to buy and to sell at the same time, the more they could earn. Because actually they could have hyped and dumped you, and they could have exited your investments at the peak of your hype, and you'd have no way of knowing. The better strategy is to optimize for the long term and to take mistakes not as signals of doom, but as they are, as normal encounters on your own path to success. Most of the time, today is not that important. Over the course of your lifetime as an investor, the decisions that you will make today or tomorrow or the next week will not matter nearly as much as what you do during a small number of days. Likely 1% of the time or less, when everyone else around you is going crazy. So to highlight the effects of a long-term strategy, Morgan Housel gives us a numerical example by way of story. Consider these three investors. Consider what would happen if you saved $1 for every month from 1900s to 2019. You could invest that $1 into the US stock market every month, rain or shine. It doesn't matter if economists are screaming about the looming recession or new bear market. You just keep investing. Let's call an investor who does this Sue. But maybe investing during a recession is too scary. So perhaps you invest your $1 in the stock market when the economy is not in a recession, sell everything when it's in a recession, and save your monthly dollar in cash and invest everything back into the stock market when the recession ends. Let's call this investor Jim. Or perhaps it takes a few months for the recession to scare you out, and then it takes you a while to regain confidence before you get back in the market. You invest $1 in stocks when there's no recession. You sell 6 months after a recession begins, and invest back 6 months after a recession ends. We'll call this third investor Tom. So the question is, how much money would each of these three investors end up with over time? If you remember, Immortal Sue invests $1 in the stock market every year since the 1900s up to 2019. Immortal Jim invests $1 every time the market is up, withdraws every time there is a recession, saves his money, and invests again every time the market is on its way up. While Immortal Tom waits for 6 months before pulling his money out and waits for another 6 months before putting his money back in. You want the numbers? Here you go. Sue ends up with $435,551, whereas Jim only ends up with $257,486, and Tom ends up with only $234,386. Immortal Sue gets almost double the money of Immortal Jim and Immortal Tom. Why does this happen? Because of compound interest. Now, we're going to deal with this topic later on in one of our later episodes of the Yellow Pill podcast. But suffice it to say, Einstein once said, although this can't be verified, he said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, and those who understand it, earn it, and those who don't, pay it. So because Immortal Sue stuck to a long-term strategy, regardless of what happens, she was able to act normally even when those around her were going insane. Every time the stock market crashes, everybody wants to bail out and stop the bleeding, and just walk away with their paper loss. But if you zoom out of every crash, you know that historically, markets have been able to bounce back stronger from every crash since the 1900s to the present day. That's another thing. You need to take these three things in consonance. The first one was failing forward, allowing yourself the grace to make mistakes to learn in order to succeed. But the second one is that you need to be counterintuitive. The way to make it in the markets is to sell when everyone else is buying and to buy when everyone else is selling. In this case, Immortal Sue just did the normal thing and stuck to her long-term strategy of investing $1 every month in the stock market. In time, that has made all the difference. I think this was a quote from Napoleon where he says, "A good definition of a genius is doing the average thing when everyone else around you is going crazy." So why did Immortal Sue end up earning almost double that of Immortal Jim and Immortal Tom? This is why. There were 1,428 months between 1900s and 2019. Just over 300 of them were in a recession. So by keeping her cool during just the 22% of the time the economy was in a recession, Sue ends up with 3/4 more money than Immortal Jim and Immortal Tom. To illustrate how you behaved as an investor during a few months in the late 2008 and early 2009 will likely have more impact on your lifetime returns than everything you did from the year 2000 to the year 2008. Now let's take this principle and tie it back to failing forward as we revisit our Amazon story. So you've never heard of Amazon's Fire Phone because it was a total failure. They launched it to compete with the Apples and the Blackberries and the Androids of the world, but it failed. It failed massively. They were not able to deliver and they had to take it off the product line. And here's the thing. Intuitively, you'd think that because this was a failure, then it was a bad thing, that Jeff Bezos made a mistake and that he should apologize for his mistake. He should quit. He should give up because he failed miserably with his idea, the Fire Phone, that turned out to be a total flop. We don't even know about it because it was a total flop, guys. But this is what Morgan Housel had to say about the Fire Phone. Something I've learned from both investors and entrepreneurs is that no one makes good decisions all the time. The most impressive people are packed full of horrendous ideas that are often acted upon. Take Amazon. It's not intuitive to think that a failed product launch at a major company would be normal and fine. Intuitively, you'd think the CEO should apologize to the shareholders. And you know what Jeff Bezos said shortly after the launch of the Fire Phone? He said, and I quote his words, "If you think that's a big failure, we're working on much bigger failures right now. I am not kidding. Some of them are gonna make the Fire Phone look like a tiny little blip." So if you look at Jeff Bezos and his attitude towards failure, he gets it, man. He gets that in order to succeed, you have to fail your way to success. And the bigger the failure, the bigger the lesson, the closer and the faster you actually get to the success that you want. So Jeff Bezos, I'm sure he's projected this, that his career with Amazon is a long-term game. And because he's playing a long-term game, then he is allowed to graciously make mistakes as big as the Fire Phone, as long as he is right with some of his experimental ideas that are actually right, like Prime Video and Amazon Web Services. You see, it's okay for Amazon to lose a lot of money on the Fire Phone because it will be offset by something like Amazon Web that earns billions of dollars. Tails, guys, to the rescue. Part of why this isn't intuitive is because most fields, we only see the finished product, not the losses incurred that led to the tail end success of the product. It's the same in every field, guys. It's the same in every field. It doesn't necessarily have to be business. It doesn't necessarily have to be venture capital or investing. Even in our law firm, even in our real estate firm, a lot of people, sadly, sometimes even within our own firm, they question the system. They question their beliefs. They question the principles. Every time we encounter a small failure along the way, they get so frustrated why we're so chill about it, why it seems as if we don't care. But actually, it's because we see more than they do. We see this projected over a longer time horizon that allows us to make the small and big mistakes along the way. And we believe in the principles more than anybody else does. We believe that as long as we continue to play every day and do the normal thing, try to improve 1% better every day, then we wait for our own tail end to arrive, our own big ship. We are willing to gamble and lose on 10 Fire Phones just for the next idea to be the blockbuster hit of Carol Co., to be the next Snow White of Walt Disney. we are playing for our own tail ends. And frankly, that's all that matters to us. Netflix, on the other hand, is a different kind of company, a different kind of failing forward. I heard that one time, the former CEO of Netflix got so mad because their cancel rate wasn't high enough. And for him, that meant that the creative team, they weren't taking enough risks. They needed to have the cancel rate dip a bit to make sure that they were able to explore the ideas and see if they were bad or good. And they were willing to experiment and risk, dishing out ideas that would be sour or distasteful or bad for the audience just to hit jackpot with that 1, 2, or 3 next big trend. That's how they fail forward towards their own success, Netflix. And even comedians adopt this style as well. Even comedians like Chris Rock. Speaking of Netflix, we've seen all of the stand-up comedy shows of comedians such as Chris Rock on Netflix, and they're just funny from start to end, guys. They're just funny from start to end. But what we don't know is they actually A/B test all of their jokes during the road shows. Like, there was a guy who saw Chris Rock performing at one of the road shows. He was like fumbling with all of his notes and he was really struggling, and some of the jokes would not land well with the audience. And those are the jokes that wouldn't make it to the Netflix show. Because the Netflix show of these stand-up comedians are actually the tail end of all of the jokes that hit well with the audiences, completely disregarding all of the jokes that didn't. So, in their own regard, they A/B test, they fail forward towards that tail end. Now, the secret here is not just to fail forward and to be counterintuitive, guys, but to actually also play for the long term. Because if you don't have a long-term time horizon on your strategy, then you'd be so frustrated when you go from failure to failure that you'd end up quitting or starting with new opportunities. And that doesn't allow the compound interest of what you're doing to work in your favor. So since I got this principal idea from Morgan Housel, I'd like to end with some of his words and a quote to wrap up this whole episode. In his book, The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel says, "When we pay special attention to a role model's successes, we overlook that their gains come from a small percent of their actions. That makes our own failures, losses, and setbacks feel like we're doing something wrong. But it's possible that we are wrong, or just sort of right, just as often as the masters are. They may have been more right when they were right, but they could have been just as wrong as often as you." So guys, as you chase your own success in life, as you try to figure out what works for you and what doesn't, don't get swayed by the social media shit posters who would like to flaunt that they've achieved their success overnight. Maybe they were lucky, or maybe the overnight success that we're seeing is actually a tail end result of all of the invisible effort that they put in that we could not see. All of the times that they were right and all of the mistakes that they have made when they were wrong, all compounded into the present day success that all of us sees. Because everyone's busy, guys. Everyone is looking at the highlight reel of everyone else, and comparing, because success is relative. You only measure your own success as it relates to other people. And that's how we're being spun today, because social media algorithms, the algorithms of these platforms, they're designed to show us the best of the best, the prettiest of the prettiest, and the most successful of the most successful. And it's unfair to compare ourselves to them, because we don't see these people might be making as many mistakes as we are. And they're just right. They're more right when they were right. And maybe they were less wrong when they were wrong. And that's the quickest way to succeed in life. You just never give up on what you're doing. You just fail forward. You try to be counterintuitive with your approach, with your own strategy, and make sure you play for the long term. I'd like to end with this quote from George Soros. He says, "It's not whether you're right or wrong that's important, but how much money you make when you're right and how much money you lose when you're wrong. You can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune." I hope you enjoyed this third episode of the Yellow Pill podcast. If you haven't already, guys, please join the Yellow Pill Society on School. And please like and subscribe to this video if you enjoyed watching. I hope to bring as much value as I can and share as much of these lessons as I pick them up. These are the same lessons that are helping me on my own long road to success. I hope you can use them and succeed with them as well. I hope to get to know you, and I hope to journey with you in the Yellow Pill Society. That's it for this episode of Yellow Pill. See you next time.